Dear audience, welcome to the first lecture of Unit 7 in the INAMENA CSP video tutorials. In this lecture, I will present you the CSP project planning and project types. Moreover, this lecture will be followed by 3 more relating lectures in this unit, 2 of them on CSP project implementation and 1 on yield analysis of CSP plants. It is my honor to make this presentation and to bring in my experience to this work. I am a mechanical engineer and have been working in the solar business for the last 13 years. Since January 2010, I'm acting as INAMENA project manager at the German Aerospace Center. I will structure this lecture as follows. Firstly, I will give an overview about project types, followed by explaining the corporate finance and project finance schemes in details. I will come then to the IPP project structures and later the involved parties in an IPP process. Following this, I will demonstrate the key contractual agreements for the IPP projects, and finally I will conclude this lecture by a comparison between both project types, corporate and project financing. Several financial terms will be used in this lecture. I have to draw your attention. Since we are talking about the realization of large-scale projects, and therefore large amount of money is involved in such projects. So what you can see here are the typical project types, also in the MENA region. Here we are speaking about the so-called EPC model, corporate finance model, and the IPP model, an independent power producer, which is the project finance model. On the left-hand side, you can see the public sector and the private sector and its role in the 2 project types, EPC and IPP. So, in the corporate EPC model, the public sector finances and constructs the power plant. It also specifies the input parameters to the project. These mainly are the technical and general specifications. Moreover, the public sector controls the EPC project through ownership. Whereas in the project financed model, the public sector buys services from project company. The project company, this term will be defined later in this unit. It also defines the output parameters, technical aspects such as the power generation specifications, the financial aspects like the power purchase agreement, and the legal aspects. Finally, the public sector controls, in this case, through regulations. This is on one hand, and on the other hand, you can see that the role of the private sector is totally different in both EPC and IPP models. In the EPC model, there is a limited access for the private sector to participate in the project, whereas in the IPP model, the private sector will sell its management services to partners and will finally finance and own the project. How does a typical EPC structure look like? It starts definitely with the government and its entity. So we have the government and the utility. The utility has its own money, or it borrows it, for example, from bankers or lenders. It specifies the EPC tender documents for the EPC contractor. The EPC contractor, after has been awarded, will construct the power plant irrespective of it is CSP or not in this case. Finally, the power plant will supply power through a power purchaser to the utility with a defined tariff. So the characteristics of the EPC model are it has several sources of income in which the utility borrows, guarantees the loans for the project. Secondly, EPC has advantages over the IPP model because it is simpler, so the financing is relatively easier because there aren't many parties involved. The costs are usually cheaper because there isn't many entities involved, such as banks. In typical situations, there is some equity also. The structure is more flexible for project financing. Thirdly, erection of the CSP power plant is generally through EPC contractor. And finally, as the term indicates, the EPC contractor is responsible for engineering, procurement, construction, in addition to commissioning and handing over the power plant. Now, how does the IPP model look like? The model has in its center not anymore the utility, but the so-called project company. The project company is owned by some shareholders. Of course, the government with a share of between between 40 to 60%, and the developer, which in the project tendering phase is called the bidder, then later the successful bidder, and will be part of the project company entity. Here there is money involved, and subsequently there will be loan agreements with various banks. There is a land to be leased. There is the EPC again with an agreement, the EPC agreement, but this time the EPC is linked to the project company and not to the utility. Also, there is O&M agreement. In certain cases, there is a fuel supply agreement. Now we come to the most important agreement in this structure, the power purchase agreement, or the PPA. This agreement defines the entire setup of the project. Often setting up the PPA is done back-to-back with the EPC and O&M agreements because the technical, commercial, and financial conditions of the both agreements should be back-to-back to power purchase agreements. A typical IPP project in the MENA region is the Shams project in Abu Dhabi. On this slide, you can see the structure of Shams project. In the center here also is the project company, Shams Power Company. It has got some shareholders, in this case the government through its entity Mubadala and ADFIC, or Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, and the bidders in the bidding phase, the consortium of the French company Total and the Spanish company Abengoa. Again, you can see here the O&M agreement. There is also an EPC agreement with Abengoa, a fuel supply agreement. There is also the so-called off-taker with its power purchase agreement. So it is pretty much similar to the general structure shown on the previous slide. This is the typical way how the IPP projects are handled. The characteristics of the IPP projects are: countries are provided with the opportunity to finance projects without involving public funds. Could be also with public funds, but it gives the opportunity to do it without needing that. Investment, construction, and the operation of the technology risks are shifted to the project company in this case. This is very important because not all entities have got the entire setup to handle new large-scale projects where a lot of money is involved. Investment is simulated and private sector participation is promoted. Finally, countries benefit from the expertise and experience of the project company. That means that technology companies are coming into the country as shareholders, as EPC contractors, as consultants, or as O&M companies. This results in transferring the technology into that country, in which local companies will have the opportunity to learn from the experience made abroad by these technology companies. The prerequisites for the private sector to invest in a country, now we are talking about foreign private sector or local one could be, there are stable political and economic environment, clarity in national and regional laws and regulations, otherwise an investor wouldn't bring in any money into the country. A strong domestic capital market to borrow local long-term debt is also important. Easy and fast processing is also important. This is an interesting point that I highlight here. The typical way of IPP projects, the money lenders and knowledge companies want to see the project implementation in a certain defined and clear structure, in a process which is feasible and well known to banks because they will provide the loan. These clear structures are needed, and subsequently, if the regulatory body ensures that these implementation steps are in accordance to the banks and their requirements, the project will succeed. A fair sharing of risks between the government and the private sector is a very important condition. The foreign companies want not only to transfer technology but also to earn money. This must be well known. Therefore, the risks must be very well balanced. And finally, realistic incentives to provide attractive returns and protection of investment are important. Here, the government provides normally certain guarantees that surrounding conditions will not be changed. For example, the investors have a vital interest in fixing the PPA, the power purchase agreement period, to guarantee that this won't be changed. The power purchase agreement is fixed normally from 15 to 25 years. So what are the typical IPP project structures? There are 8 structures shown on this slide. You can see that it is always about design, build, own, operate, lease, and transfer. Most typical structures, however, are the BOO, build, own, operate, and the BOOT, build, own, operate, and transfer. Transfer in this case means after the PPA period, the plant will be handed over to the utility. This is a typical practice in the MENA region. So the involved parties in an IPP project were shown in the IPP overall structure area in this presentation. They are listed, however, here again in this slide. So we have the sponsors, shareholders. In the beginning are the government and the bidders, and finally the project company. Secondly, the government, lenders, such as commercial banks, multilateral banks, etc. Third-party equity holders, the EPC contractor, the operator or the operation and maintenance contractor, supplier, for example, fuel and water suppliers, the power off-taker, the insurers, and finally the advisors, such as technical, financial, and legal advisors. The new formed project company in the IPP project could be described through the following points. It is also called a Special Purpose Vehicle, SPV, and it is set up only for the purpose of running one particular project. In this case, the CSP project can be a partnership, limited partnership, joint venture, or a combination of them. If the project company is a joint venture, then it is likely that there are multiple borrowers, which can result in complicated financing arrangements, unless, as is likely to be the preference of the lenders, the joint venturers agree to be jointly and severally to be liable for the project debts. Jointly and severally means that one of the 2 or 3 shareholders will take over if a shareholder fails. In this regard, also, lenders, equity holders, banks, entities are very much interested in such a structure of the project companies. So if it is jointly and severally, the lenders will rely on it because they know that one of the partners certainly will take over in case of shareholder fails. So it is non-risky option for them. So the constitution of the project company depends to some extent on the legal and regulatory framework of the host country. In several MENA countries, it is a requirement that the government holds shares in the project company through one of its agencies in this case. As I mentioned already, normally 40 to 60% of the project company would be the government share, but there is no rule for that actually. Finally, the project company is the party raising the project finance. It receives the grants of concession or licenses and enters into the contractual agreements with other project parties. This matrix demonstrates the contractual relationship between the project company and the other involved parties. The relationship is regulated through contracts or agreements shown on the top of this matrix, and these are made between the project company and the involved parties, that's shown on the left-hand side of the matrix. I will go now through more details about contractual agreements needed for the IPP project, as mentioned before. The first important agreement in this regard is the shareholders agreement, which is actually the first agreement. The purpose of this agreement is to define the relationship between the project company's shareholders, including rights and obligations, and describes form as well as purpose of the project company. Key issues are extent of liability of each shareholder, restrictions on sale of equity, and ability of project company to engage in certain activities or assets. Once in a while, you will need to engage a third party for operation and maintenance requirements, or even there are activities adjacent to the plant. So the project company with its shareholders agreement should define what the legal possibilities of shareholders are. The EPC contract ensures that a plant with specified characteristics is built on time within budget by an experienced contractor. A precise contract terms such as fixed price, turnkey terms will be chosen most probably to ensure implementing agencies. The contract will include the construction milestones and the completion date. It will include also penalties for not meeting contract terms. Now we come to operation and maintenance agreement, which ensures that a plant with specified characteristics is built on time and within the budget. And here once again it ensures that an experienced O&M contractor is involved. Operators' obligations for ensuring plant availability and other efficiency indicators are precisely described in such a contract. The availability of the plant is very important because the normal structures in projects realized are that the operator guarantees certain availability of the plant, normally 92%. With this availability, this contract is defined. Subsequently, the financing model of the project company takes this into account, and the power purchase agreement has got also certain economics assumptions. So the efficiency and the availability of the plant are vital to project success. This agreement includes also lines of communications with purchaser and dispatch system. It includes also penalties for non-performance. We have also the land lease agreement that guarantees that the IPP access to land for project site and that it makes proper use of it. This is an important aspect since a study on land should be done even before starting the project. The study should be performed prior to all agreements' effective date, in which the characteristics of the land should be analyzed and the suitability to erect a project there should be investigated. Therefore, such an access in the initial stage should be guaranteed to the project company or to the bidder in that case. This agreement includes the financial terms and duration, normally based on the PPA agreement duration again. It includes also conditions for the renewability of lease and, as mentioned before, the access rights for project company. The power purchase agreement governs technical and commercial conditions covering the selling of power by project to external purchaser and the supply of power. For example, low voltage, medium voltage supply. For startup, for example, you must have some supply options from the national grid or another plant nearby. The insurance coverage limits losses to project company due to various events and natural disasters. We're speaking here about typically force majeure. The force majeure events are to be precisely listed, and the amount of compensation has to be also defined in this agreement. It is known that the more you insure, the higher will be the prices. So the amount of insurance coverage is based normally on balancing of the risk and the probability of that risk. The agreement should include also the term of the agreement, which is renewed usually on annual basis. So all these contracts are finally providing a kind of security package for the project. Each portion of this puzzle is important to ensure that the project can be realized on time and efficiently. Finally, there is the loan agreement that provides financing for substantial portions of the project costs. 75% is a typical figure, but it can also be 80 or 85. This depends on the situation of the project and also the country. To be defined in the loan agreement are interest rate and repayment schedule, condition precedent to making cash available, recourse to borrowers or others, and security and sit-up rights. It makes sense to go into the details of the contractual agreement since there are many prerequisites and a time frame required for the IPP projects. On this slide, we start with the power purchase agreement, the PPA. As I mentioned, the agreement is between the developer in the beginning and later the project company, and with the off-taker, who is normally a governmental body, the utility, in other words. The PPA allocates the risk between the contract parties, taking into account which party can manage the particular project risk in the best way. Normally, developers or bidders have a very precise understanding how a power plant should be operated. For example, they have an EPC that should be very experienced. They have also got their own facilities and tools to technically supervise the operation of the plant. So they have a clear picture about risks, and finally, each risk will be priced. Therefore, the risk is better balanced as per market now according to the IPP business principle in itself with a power purchase agreement. The guideline of the power purchase agreement should always be the bankability of the project, considering the project financing structure. So the risk controlled by the project company is the suitability of technology, malfunctions or capacity not met during acceptance tests, construction costs overruns, construction delays, construction recovery during operation, guaranteed performance if this is not met. These risks are allocated to the project company and should be tackled with the EPC contract mainly. And the risk allocated to the power off-taker, normally the government as I mentioned, are the market risk, availability and fuel price if a fuel supply agreement is in place, the exchange rate, the inflation adjustment, change of legal and regulatory framework. We spoke earlier in beginning about creating and securing the continuity of a good environment for investment. So it belongs to the same field here. Political force majeure, this is to be covered by the government, the off-taker in this case, part risk cover of natural force majeure, and single buyer credit risk, all of these things to be addressed. So the PPA or power purchase agreement is the core binding document of the project realization. It lasts between 15 and 25 years, shorter for BOOT projects, build, own, operate, transfer projects, an average of 15 years, longer for build, own, operate, the BOO scheme, an average of 20 years. The PPA is generally performance-oriented, cash flow dependent on the compliance with the guaranteed performance figures stipulated by the contract, so it is the matter of availability of the power plant. Project company covers the cost risks for construction, financing, and operation of the CSP plant, and risks which are outside the control of the project company have to be covered by insurances as well as by the government in some cases. So does the classical tariff structure a relating subject? On this slide we can see the classical tariff structure, and here irrespective to that whether it is an EPC procurement or corporate finance or an IPP project finance, the tariff structure is divided into two sections, the capacity payment and the energy payment. The capacity payment has the capital cost and the fixed O&M cost recovery components. The capital cost component is firstly the debt service with its principal and interest on debt that is needed to fund the EPC cost, startup expenses, development cost, advisory services, import duties and taxes, and secondly, the shareholders' return. Since there is equity involved, there should be return on developers, investors' equity contribution or contribution tax. The second component of the capacity payment is fixed O&M cost. That includes the salaries, overheads, administration, inventory, insurances, etc. All these costs are in the capacity components. I have to highlight here that in this case, even if the plant does not operate, we still have to pay these costs, and also we have to make sure that the capacity payment is sufficient to cover the off-grid period in order not to go directly to bankruptcy. The second section of the classical tariff structure is the energy payment. Here we have the variable operation and maintenance costs, such as fuel, if applicable, and the remaining O&M costs, such as spare parts, chemicals, consumables, and tools, which are depending on plant output. Now I'll go to more details in the EPC contract. So it is between the project company and the EPC contractor. The EPC contract is an important component of the integrated and optimized package of the contractual agreements. It should be arranged back-to-back with the power purchase agreement as mentioned to be the backbone of the project. The EPC contract price has a very high impact on the competitiveness of the offered power tariff. The reason is that for CSP power plants, low operation and maintenance costs and high investment costs are involved. Subsequently, the investment costs, in this case the EPC price, have a huge impact on the overall project. The total EPC costs account for around 80 to 90% of the total project costs. This depends upon the nature of the project. The EPC contractor is either one single company or a consortium. We spoke about jointly and severally principle. On the power plants market, there is a number of EPC contractors with track record of large-scale power plants. There is a well-developed chain of industrial EPC contractors with such a record, but this is limited in the CSP field. Contractors for the parabolic trough power plants, for example, have the best record in this moment. The CSP is a fast-growing market with new players coming in. Therefore, we have to have a precise look onto the track record of the EPC contractor and its experience gain. This is done normally in the tendering phase through eligibility criteria to select the best bidding EPC contractor. So the project company can shift the construction and commissioning risks to the EPC contractor. In this regard, a typical EPC sheet includes the technical and testing requirements as well as the legal and commercial requirements, performance and delay LDs, which should always cover the LDs toward the off-taker, otherwise you are facing a gap. A typical value for the delay LDs is 10% of the EPC price. This is the cap that EPC is obliged to pay. The client could also reject the plant, but this normally never happens. In this regard, there is also an overall aggregated ceiling of typically up to 25% of the EPC price for performance LDs and delay LDs, and the whole setup ends around 25%. It is closely linked to the power purchase agreement, as I explained, in terms of back-to-back principle. The EPC contract is a lump sum turnkey contract, and we are talking about one lot contract. But what does it mean by saying lump sum contract? An EPC contract, for our understanding, is so-called turnkey contract. This means one lot only. The contract is given to company or a consortium of companies to construct the power plant and hand it over to the owner. Whereas there is also the so-called lot-wise approach, where several lots to construct the power plant are applied. Different from that is having more than one EPC contract to build one CSP power plant. For example, in Kuraymat CSP power plant in Egypt, there is one EPC contract for the solar island and another for the power island. You could also have the real lot-wise principle, which is now handled in India. India is used to implement the power plant in lot-wise principle in order to enable the utilities to interfere in every step of the project procurement, and subsequently it is handling all interfaces. So the description for lot-wise contract principle is, firstly, splitting of the scope of work into lots. Secondly, contracts awarded lot by lot to different bidders and suppliers. You can imagine if the utility goes to lot-wise approach, since all lots to some extent link to each other, it has to know exactly what the sequence of procurement of engineering is. Right engineering at the right time and right procurement at the right time, and so forth. So the utility in this case must be very, very experienced in all these developing steps. Whereas in the turnkey EPC contract or one lot principle, the risk of procurement and engineering is totally in the hand of the EPC contractor. So the role of special purpose company or the project company, or could be even the utility in the lot-wise approach, is to award and control all individual lots. It coordinates all lots with regard to the overall realization, whereas in the turnkey EPC contract, the SPC performs supervisory and quality assurance role. The risk allocation in the case of the lot-wise approach is that the SPC bears the risk, for example, deadlines, cost, and quality for the overall project implementation. And also the operating risk lies with the SPC. This is a very critical point. In the IPP case, the operator is involved from the early stages as the EPC contractor defines its technologies, its sequences, familiarity with the equipment to be ordered. So it is important in the IPP principle that the operator interferes in the early stages of the development to bring its experience. This is important to estimate the capability of the plant in order to calculate its availability. So in the turnkey EPC contract case, the EPC contractor bears overall risk and the operating risk lies still with the special purpose company. Now we come to the operation and maintenance contract. This contract is between the project company and the operator. The O&M contract is a further important component of the integrated and optimized package of contractual agreements. O&M contractor should already be involved in the project design phase, as mentioned, in order to guarantee that there are no problems with the operation of the plant. We'll come to that in the second lecture. During the operation phase, the O&M contractor guarantees the commercial availability, capacity, and performance of the CSP plant in accordance with the figures stipulated by the operation and maintenance contract. There are different structures available for operation and maintenance contracts. And finally, operator fee is often performance related. So the operation and maintenance agreement ensures that the solar power project is properly operated and maintained. Long-term operation risks are allocated between the operator and the project company. So it should be again balanced, in which only part transfer of long-term operation risk to the operation and maintenance contractor. Here, the project company bears most of the operation risks. The operator fee is partly used to cover the operation risks. To be aware of that risk, an exact determination of long-term solar resources is very important. Due to highest risk during operation phase, project developer is often also operator. This enables the direct access to plant and therefore having the maximum risk control. It is often in the solar power plant business that the developer is part of the shareholder and is operating also the plant. So the potential operation and maintenance contract structures are fixed price structure, cost plus structure, or intensive and penalty structure. In the fixed price structure, operation and maintenance contractor is paid a fixed price for the operation of the CSP plant. Operation and maintenance contractor, on one hand, bears the risk of cost overruns and therefore tends to be more expensive than the other structures. In the cost plus structure, the operation and maintenance contractor is paid a fixed fee together with the cost incurred for the actual operation of the plant, such as consumables, spare parts, etc. Normally, the fixed fee represents the profit of the operation and maintenance contractor. In this structure, the project company bears the risk of increased operation and maintenance costs. The last structure is incentive and penalty structure, which is the best option for the market. It allows that remuneration of the operation and maintenance contractor linked to the specific performance targets. Subsequently, a bonus if agreed performance targets are exceeded, and a penalty if agreed performance targets are not met. Lenders usually prefer this structure as the operational risks for the project company are reduced, and the structure offers the prospect that the project is efficiently operated within the budget. Now, what are the typical provisions of the operation and maintenance contract? First of all, the services in which the project operator agrees to perform for an annual fee all operation, maintenance, and management services for the project in accordance with industry practices and the Operation and Maintenance Manual, and in a manner consistent with the project requirements. Secondly, the operator responsibility. The operator usually assumes residual project operating risks under normal circumstances, but not force majeure, technical and market risks such as the unavailability of required supplies. For example, fossil fuels in the case of an ISCC power plant. Then, provision regarding services. An operation and maintenance agreement describes the general services to be provided by the operator, including performing day-to-day operation, management, and maintenance activities. Liquidated damages, the operator should also take responsibility for the LDs. And finally, the fee provision. The fee provision depends on the O&M contract structure, as mentioned in the previous slides. Finally, we come to the comparison between the two project options, the IPP and the corporate financing schemes. The comparison shows that the assets in the case of corporate finance are for the borrower, whereas in the IPP model, these assets are owned by the project company and are therefore project assets that could be sold for refinancing, for example. The accounting treatment in the case of EPC finance is the so-called on-balance sheet. Here we talk about the utility balance sheet, whereas in the IPP finance, we have the so-called off-balance sheet. The main variables considered when granting credit are the customer relations, financial soundness, profitability, company assets in the EPC model case. So you take a look at the utility, while for the IPP model, the future cash flows only are relevant and to be considered. That is why the entire setup and structure of the project is more complicated, because you have to ensure that the lenders trust your structure and therefore that there will be revenue from the project. Subsequently, the grants are more expensive in this case. The leverage is defined as the company's debt that expressed as percentage of its equity. If we talk about sustainable leverage, we mean here a sustainable debt-equity ratio in the course of the project. In the case of EPC finance, this depends on the effects on the borrower's balance sheet, and in the IPP finance, it depends upon the cash flow generated by the project, the future cash flow in this case, which means that the leverage is greater in this case. The project control in the case of EPC financing model is performed usually by the management of the utility, because it's the owner. Also, the board of directors monitors performance of the plant on behalf of the shareholders. Here we have limited direct monitoring by investors. In the IPP financing case, the management, in this case we're talking about the project company, remains in control, but is subject to closer monitoring by the investors in all cases. For that, contractual agreements governing the debt and equity investments contain covenants and other provisions that facilitate such monitoring for the investors. The financing could typically be arranged quickly for the EPC model, as I have already mentioned, which gives more financial flexibility, whereas more information and more people are involved in the IPP model, and therefore it is more expensive. The principle of buying and selling is shifting between the models. In the corporate model, the owner buys the plant from the EPC contractor based on its own specifications and design. In the project finance, we notice that the off-taker or the utility is interested in promoting a project to the developers community. The development and design of the project itself remains within the developer's scope. An important point is the scope of optimization of technology. which varies between the two models. In the EPC model, the design is influenced by owner's concept. Often there is a defined EPC tender with procurement and engineering principle, which should be followed by the EPC contractor. Here, the EPC contractor optimizes neither the plan design nor the operation. In the project finance model, the developer or the bidder is free to optimize the design, and he finally will be the operator. And because of that, he is allowed also to optimize the operation and maintenance for his plant because he has a vital interest to increase the reviews of the project. So construction versus operating. In the EPC model, EPC contractor is focused on cheap design, whereas in the project model, the project company is mostly focused on high availability of the plant during operation and low risk of shortages. Finally, the involvement of the private sector in the EPC financing model is limited during design and construction period, of course through the EPC contractor. In the IPP model, the private sector participates through the entire project, for example, during construction period and during operation and maintenance period, through project company, EPC contractor, O&M contractors, etc. So we come now to the end of this unit. Thanks a lot for your attention.